A complete story of how I found myself in a forced marriage with a billionaire. And as I like to call it, the other side of shiny lifestyle. I'm curled up in my little apartment, yes, mine, a quiet corner of Manhattan where the city feels less loud and more like a hum in the background. The lights from the street below flicker on the ceiling. And my tea's gone cold, but I keep holding the cup anyway. It's something to hold on to. It's been 10 years. 10 years since I married Daniel. 10 years since I was told that love could wait, but the wedding couldn't. I remember the day they told me. My parents. His parents. All smiles and folded hands and empty reassurances. It's what's best for the family, Emily. You'll learn to love him. I was 24. I just landed a junior designer job at a boutique in Soho. I thought my life was finally mine. But in one afternoon, they rewrote it for me. Daniel was everything they wanted. A billionaire. Polished. Respected. Strategic. And cold. God, he was cold. Not just to the touch, but to the soul. The kind of man who never raised his voice because silence worked better. And me? I became his accessory. A wife. A name. A beautiful echo in the background of his empire. They called it a union between powerful families. I called it a sentence. But I wore the dresses. I smiled at the galas. I kissed him on cue. And every night, I came home to a penthouse with more square footage than affection. He had his secrets. I had mine, too. Liam. He wasn't planned. Neither was the way he made me feel, alive, heard, seen. With him, I could breathe. With him, I wasn't his wife, I was just Emily. But that's not where the story ends. That's not even where it begins. Because before there was Liam. Before the broken vows and the stolen moments and the guilt, there was me, a woman trying to hold on to herself while everything around her was chosen for her. A woman who kept her dreams folded between evening gowns and cocktail parties. A woman who built a career while burying a heart. And this story, this monologue, this confession, isn't about a scandal. It's not about a billionaire or an affair. It's about the cost of being silenced. The slow erosion of a soul. The beauty of rediscovery. So if you're still here, if you're still listening, let me tell you the truth. All of it. Not just the facts. But what it felt like. Because pain has a shape. And love has a shadow. And sometimes, surviving something beautiful hurts more than the thing that broke you. You don't just wake up one day in a stranger's bed and call it fate. No, these things start long before the wedding invitations. Before the dress fittings. Before the signatures on papers that mean you now belong to someone. They start with family. Mine, to be specific. The Fairchilds. We weren't royalty, but you wouldn't know that by walking into my parents' house in Westchester. My father, Arthur Fairchild, made his fortune in real estate development. He had a talent for turning dead land into steel skeletons and glass palaces. My mother, Helen, was a woman of appearances, always dressed for a luncheon, even when she was home alone. They were powerful, elegant, cold. Like marble columns in a museum, impressive, but not something you touched. I was their only child. The one who wasn't supposed to happen. They had me in their 40s, after years of trying and giving up. I always felt like a checkbox on a long to-do list. Raised by nannies, educated by tutors, and presented like a debutante in a glass box. But I was different. I didn't want the legacy. I didn't want the expectations. I wanted fabrics and color palettes, sketchbooks and mannequins. I wanted to create. And for a while, I thought they'd let me have that. They even smiled when I got into P. I mistook that smile for pride. I see now, it was relief. They thought I'd outgrow it. I didn't. Daniel's family, the Kensingtons, were old money. His father, Charles, owned a global shipping conglomerate. His mother, Vivian, was a social architect. She didn't just host galas, she curated them. They lived in a Fifth Avenue townhouse that looked like it had never seen a single imperfection, not even dust. I remember meeting them when I was 12. I wore a pale blue dress with white flats and kept tugging at the hem. Vivian looked me up and down like I was an investment property she was inspecting. "You'll grow into your cheekbones," she said. That was her version of a compliment. From then on, we had dinners, holidays, vacations in the Hamptons. I was always seated next to Daniel. Always told to talk to him, get to know him. I didn't see it for what it was. Back then, he was just the quiet older boy who barely spoke unless someone asked him about stocks. I didn't dislike him. I just didn't feel anything. And no one told me that mattered. Years passed. I focused on school, then on internships, then on the dream of starting my own design label. I thought if I proved myself, really proved myself, they'd back off. That they'd be proud of me for building something without their name attached to it. I was so young. So hopeful. And then one Sunday afternoon, everything changed. I remember the way the dining room smelled, lemon polish and roasted rosemary chicken. My parents were seated, Daniel and his parents across from them. No one was eating. That should have been the first sign. "Emily," my father said, voice tight with importance. "We've made a decision that will benefit everyone." Everyone but me, apparently. The next 10 minutes were a blur. Words like merger, stability, legacy, and family bond floated around the room like smoke. And then came the final blow. "You and Daniel will marry." I laughed. Out loud. I looked at Daniel, expecting him to laugh too. He didn't. He just stared at me, expression unreadable. Like he'd known all along. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't new. This had been planned. Talked about. Arranged. I wasn't being asked. I was being positioned. I protested, of course. I cried, screamed, begged. My mother just sat there, dabbing at her lipstick-stained wineglass, telling me I was being dramatic. My father? He was stone. He told me I could choose to go through with it gracefully, or I could embarrass the family. But either way, the wedding was happening. They framed it as sacrifice. Duty. But it was a transaction. A contract with my name inked in silence. Daniel? He didn't love me. I don't think he even liked me. But he agreed. Willingly. Maybe because it secured his position in the family empire. Maybe because feelings weren't something he valued. Maybe because no one ever told him no. So I said yes. Or rather, I stopped saying no. That night, I went back to my apartment and sat on the floor of my closet for 3 hours. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just stared at my dresses, my sketches, the sewing machine I bought with my first freelance paycheck. I wanted to believe that I could still have some part of my life. That maybe this marriage would just be a title. That I could keep designing, keep creating, keep dreaming. I didn't know then how much a last name could weigh. How quickly dreams dissolve when no one around you believes in them. I walked down the aisle 6 months later. White silk. Veil like mist. Flashing cameras. Empty bows. 1,000 people in the room, and I still felt completely alone. That was the beginning. Not of our marriage. But of my disappearance. They say when you get married, your life changes. But they never say how. Or what kind of change they mean. They don't talk about the quiet ones. The slow, creeping kind that rewrites you until even your reflection starts to look unfamiliar. I moved into Daniel's penthouse the morning after the wedding. A glass fortress in Tribeca, 30 floors above the noise. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble everything, lighting that adjusted by voice command. It was breathtaking. Beautiful. And cold. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a stage. Daniel didn't give a tour. He handed me a keycard and said, "You'll find your space upstairs." Not our space. Your space. That was the first rule. We don't share. Not space. Not time. Not truth. His office was off limits. His meetings were not to be interrupted. His bedroom, yes, we had separate bedrooms, was on the opposite side of the apartment. I was told I could decorate my area however I wanted, as long as it didn't clash with the overall aesthetic. Like I was a throw pillow he wasn't sure belonged on the couch. The second rule was unspoken, but louder than any words. Appear perfect. Always. It started with Vivian, of course. She would drop by unannounced with her hairstylist or personal shopper, saying things like, "Darling, you mustn't wear flats to brunch. It sends the wrong message." She meant weak. Unimportant. Replaceable. I was expected to attend charity galas, ribbon cuttings, museum dinners, all with a gracious smile and a hand lightly resting on Daniel's arm. He never looked at me. He posed with me. I was a photo op, not a person. And if I ever slipped up, if I wore the wrong designer or fumbled a question from a socialite, He would lean in close and whisper through his teeth, "Fix it." I learned fast. How to fake laughter. How to glide through a room like I belonged. How to make strangers adore me while feeling completely invisible inside. The third rule came late. Quiet. Like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Don't ask questions. I found the lipstick first. Not mine. Wine red. Stained into the collar of his white button-down. I was folding laundry, not because I had to, but because I missed feeling normal. I stared at it for a full minute before my stomach even reacted. I confronted him that night, careful, cautious, scared. He looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. "Emily," he said, "you knew what this was." I didn't respond. Because I wasn't sure what this was anymore. A business deal? A performance? A sentence with no parole? The next morning, I woke up to a brand new Chanel bag on my dresser. A gift. A peace offering. Or a distraction. And just like that, the fourth rule wrote itself. Take the silence. Accept the gift. Move on. I think that was the moment something in me started to split. By day, I played the role. By night, I sketched. Late hours with a pencil in hand and music playing softly in the background, I poured everything I couldn't say into my designs. Fabric didn't talk back. It didn't cheat. It didn't ask me to pretend. It just let me create. And in those quiet hours, I remembered who I was, just a little. And then, something happened. Someone happened. His name was Liam, and he came in like a breath I didn't know I was holding. He was hired as a photographer for one of the Kensington Foundation's art exhibitions. A casual event at first, something I wasn't even going to attend. But Vivian insisted I show face. And thank God she did. He wasn't like them. Not polished. Not rehearsed. Not pretending. He had this quiet energy, confident, but kind. He saw people. And somehow, he saw me. He asked about my sketches. No one ever asked about my sketches. We talked for 20 minutes. Maybe 30. But after weeks of silence in my own home, it felt like sunlight cracking through stained glass. I didn't give him my number. I didn't need to. He found me again. At another event. Then again, 3 weeks later. And every time he said hi, I remembered I was still alive. No, it didn't start as an affair. It started as oxygen. As warmth. As someone saying, "You matter." But that story, our story, will come later. First, I need you to understand something. My world with Daniel wasn't made of shouting or slammed doors. It was made of looks. Expectations. Consequences. It was a quiet kind of suffocation. The kind where you're smiling while drowning. And the worst part? No one knew. No one asked. No one wanted to know. Because as long as the Fairchild name stayed polished. As long as the Kensington stayed powerful. My pain didn't matter. Only the picture did. The first time Liam said my name, I forgot I was someone's wife. It was at the Met fundraiser. One of those evenings where elegance dripped from every chandelier and champagne flutes floated like currency. I was wearing silver. My hair pinned into a low knot so tight it made my temples throb. Daniel hadn't shown up. Business, he texted. Always business. I stood near a marble pillar, nursing a drink I didn't want, trying not to make eye contact with Vivian, who was scanning the room like a queen counting her courtiers, when I saw him again. Liam. Brown hair just a little too long. A gray jacket with the sleeves slightly rolled. Camera slung over his shoulder like it was part of him. He wasn't taking pictures. Just watching. Observing the room the way someone reads a story. And then he looked at me. And smiled. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't forced. It was curious. Warm. Like he remembered me, not just my face, but the fact that I once told him I used to stay up sketching dresses instead of sleeping. He walked over slowly, respectfully, like someone stepping onto sacred ground. "Emily," he said softly, like a secret. "Didn't think I'd see you here tonight." And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened a little. We talked. Just like before. Small things. Safe things. Art, light, music, the city at night. He told me he loved capturing quiet moments, people looking away, hands reaching for glasses, laughter just before it breaks free. You can tell everything about someone by what they do when they think no one's watching, he said. I thought about that for hours afterward. Because with Daniel, I was always being watched. And with Liam, I felt seen. We began to run into each other more. At events. In galleries. Once, even at a coffee shop in Soho where I went to clear my head. He was there editing photos, earphones in, completely focused. I almost turned around. But he saw me, and smiled like I was exactly the person he hoped would walk in. I told myself we were just friends. But I stopped telling Daniel where I was going. And I started wearing lipstick again. We'd sit in public places, close enough to feel warmth, but never touching. We talked about dreams, mine buried deep under duty, his still chasing freelance gigs between art shows. He asked what I wanted. No one had asked me that in years. I used to want a studio, I whispered once. A real one. With sunlight, bolts of fabric, a corner where I could just create. He looked at me like I was magic. Not pathetic. Not childish. Just real. He made me believe, for a moment, that I still could. But hope is dangerous when you live in a glass cage. One night, I made the mistake of coming home too late. Daniel was waiting. He didn't ask questions. He didn't shout. He just looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes and said, "You're becoming sloppy." That was it. No accusations. No interest in why. Just control. I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed shaking. And that night, I picked up my sketchbook. I drew a dress. Not for anyone else. Not for a gala or a brand. For me. It was bold. Black. Edged in gold threads like armor. A dress for a woman who wasn't afraid anymore. That was the night I realized I couldn't keep living in two worlds. I couldn't be Emily Fairchild Kensington, society wife with a silent smile and glass shoes. And also be Emily, the girl who fell in love with art, with sunlight, and, maybe, just maybe, with a man who saw her through a camera lens and chose her every single time. But love wasn't simple. Not here. Not in this life. If Daniel found out. If my parents found out. If Vivian found out. I could lose everything. But hadn't I already? My name. My voice. My freedom. Liam was a risk. But he was also the only thing that made me feel real again. So I kept seeing him. First in daylight. Then behind closed doors. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breath. It felt like finally waking up. I used to believe the worst kind of prison was made of walls. Now I know, it's made of silence. The more time I spent with Liam, the more impossible it became to pretend in Daniel's world. It was like trying to breathe in a room with no windows, no air, no self. My marriage had always been cold, but now it felt suffocating. And yet, I stayed. Because of the deal. Because of my parents. Because I still didn't know what would happen if I left. It wasn't just money that bound us, it was legacy. Fairchild and Kensington. Old families with older values. My parents called it security. I called it a cage dressed in pearls. And Liam. He was sunlight in my hidden corner. We never planned it. Not the touches. Not the kisses. Not the moment when our hands lingered too long on a park bench in Central Park, and I leaned in before I could stop myself. He kissed me like he'd been holding his breath since the day we met. And I let him. We told ourselves it was just one moment. But one moment turned into two. And soon, I was building a secret life in the cracks of my real one. I started lying. Telling Daniel I had extended meetings or charity events. Telling my mother I was taking yoga. Telling myself I could keep it all separate. But love, real love, doesn't stay small. Liam would come to my studio after dark. The one I quietly rented in a quiet part of Brooklyn with the little savings I had managed to keep hidden. A small, dusty place above a florist shop. Peeling paint. Weak pipes. A single wide window that caught just enough sunset to make you believe in second chances. It wasn't much. But it was mine. And with him there, it felt like the only honest thing I had. We'd sit for hours. I'd sketch. He'd edit photos. Sometimes he'd take pictures of me working, claiming he loved the way I looked when I forgot the world was watching. "I think you were born to do this," he said once, holding up one of my designs. You don't just draw clothes. You draw power. Women who've survived things. I cried that night. Not because he was wrong. Because he was right. And because no one had ever looked at me and seen strength. But every good thing in my life carried a shadow now. A fear. I started checking over my shoulder. Watching my words. I became an actress in both worlds, perfect wife, devoted daughter, passionate artist, secret lover. I hated myself some nights. I told Liam we had to stop. He didn't fight me. He just looked at me with those eyes, calm, sad, waiting. I'll go, he said. But just tell me one thing, Emily. When you lie next to him, do you feel anything at all? I didn't answer. Because silence was easier than truth. And the truth was, I hadn't felt anything for Daniel since the day we met. The guilt didn't come from betraying my husband. It came from betraying the version of myself I once promised I'd protect. That girl, the real Emily, was screaming somewhere inside me. Screaming to be free. But freedom has a cost. And soon, I would have to decide whether I was willing to pay it. Because secrets never stay buried. And mine were beginning to rise like smoke under a locked door. The beginning of the end was a sound. Not a scream. Not a slammed door. Just a breath. I heard it one night, coming home late from the studio. It was after 11. The elevator was quiet, the hallway still. I unlocked the door with my usual caution, heels off before the marble foyer, key slipped silently into my coat pocket. But when I stepped inside, I froze. Daniel was awake. He sat in the living room, legs crossed, a half-empty glass of scotch in one hand. The television flickered low, playing some political documentary he wasn't watching. His eyes were on me. He didn't say anything. Just sipped. And exhaled. That sound. That long, knowing breath. That was the sound of suspicion. Of something sharp forming just beneath the surface. I smiled. Lied. Sorry I'm late. The fundraiser ran long. His mouth twitched slightly. Did it? The glass in my hand trembled. I set it down before he noticed. He didn't press. He never pressed. That was the danger with Daniel, he never fought. He watched. He waited. He stored things in those deep, silent pockets of his mind and let them rot there until he was ready to use them. I escaped to the bedroom, peeled off the facade, and stood in front of the mirror for what felt like hours. I looked like a stranger. Painted lips. Hollow eyes. My reflection was beautiful, but it wasn't mine. I thought of Liam. Of how I laughed when I was with him. Of how I spoke freely, fully, without measuring every word. He hadn't messaged me that night. He always did. But not tonight. A cold thought slipped into my spine. What if someone saw us? What if Daniel knew? What if my parents? I couldn't even finish the thought. Because the one thing worse than living this life was losing everything I had managed to build outside of it. My studio. My sketches. My love. The next morning, my mother called. Darling, you've been absent lately. People are asking questions. And Daniel. He says you've been distant. Is everything all right? That voice. Always wrapped in polite pressure. I wanted to scream at her. Tell her that nothing was all right. That she had traded my happiness for status, my freedom for a mansion and a man who never really saw me. Instead, I said, I've just been working a lot. She sighed delicately. Work is good. But don't forget your place, Emily. You have a duty. A position. A position. I was never a daughter. Never a woman. Just a pawn. A role. Something in me broke then. Quietly. Internally. Like glass under too much weight. That day, I skipped my meetings. I went to the Brooklyn studio and locked the door behind me. Sat on the floor and let the silence hold me. I didn't sketch. I didn't call Liam. I just breathed. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel everything. The guilt. The longing. The fear. And beneath all of it, this terrible, rising need. To run. Not to escape punishment, but to find myself before I disappeared completely. But how do you walk away from a life built to trap you? How do you undo years of being a perfectly designed version of someone else? And how do you do it without losing the one person who makes you feel alive? That night, I stood in front of Daniel again. In the same living room. Same silence. Only this time, I asked the question. Are you happy? He blinked. Tilted his head. What? With me. This life. Are you happy? He didn't answer right away. He set down his glass, looked at me like I was a riddle he didn't care to solve. Finally, he said, happiness wasn't part of the agreement. And that was the moment I knew something had to change. Because I didn't want an agreement anymore. I wanted a life. One that belonged to me. The truth didn't explode. It leaked. Like water from a cracked pipe. Slow, unstoppable, ruinous. I wish I could tell you how exactly it all came apart. That there was one clear moment, one decision, that destroyed everything. But the truth is, life doesn't shatter like that. It crumbles quietly, under pressure you didn't notice until it was too late. It started with a photo. Liam and I had been careful. Always in shadows. Always in silence. But art has a way of betraying secrets. He'd taken a picture of me months before, sunlight on my face, my fingers stained with charcoal, eyes closed like I was dreaming. He loved that picture. Called it freedom. I never thought he'd show it. But he did. At a small gallery in Dumbo. One of his first solo shows. It wasn't a big event. Not glamorous enough for Daniel's world. But someone saw it. Someone who knew me. Someone who told someone else. By the time the image reached Daniel, it was already too late. I came home to silence. Not the usual kind, the cold, distant kind. This one was heavy, dark. He was sitting in the dining room, a folder open on the table. Inside, photos, messages, printouts, proof. I stood frozen. The air turned to ice. He didn't shout. He never needed to. Is this what you've become? He asked quietly. A woman who risks everything for a hobby? A fling with a starving artist? I didn't speak. Because nothing I said would have mattered. He stood, walked over to the window, his back to me. My name. My family. My legacy. And this is what you do with it? It wasn't heartbreak in his voice. It was insult. Ego. Possession. Like I was property that had betrayed its owner. And for the first time, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I said, I'm not your legacy. I'm not a name. I'm a person. His silence said it all. He didn't see me that way. He never had. And now, he couldn't control me anymore. I left that night. I took nothing but a suitcase and my sketchbook. I called Liam from the train station. My voice shook as I asked him if I could come. He didn't ask questions. Just told me the address. Told me, yes. He opened the door like he'd been waiting a lifetime. And I collapsed into his arms. We didn't speak much that night. Just lay there on the floor of his apartment, barely furnished, windows cracked, safe. For the first time, I slept without the weight of pretending. But freedom has consequences. The fallout came fast. My parents called, furious, desperate, ashamed. You're ruining everything, my mother spat. Do you know how much we've done for you? My father offered a quiet, cutting sentence, this is a phase. You'll come back when you've embarrassed yourself enough. Daniel's lawyers came next. Discreet threats. Settlement talks. Non-disclosure agreements. And then the media. Photos. Speculation. Headlines with words like scandal, affair, golden couple undone. They didn't know the truth. No one did. But I didn't try to correct them. I stayed with Liam. Quietly. Carefully. We lived in the shadow of the noise for weeks, just the two of us, the studio, the quiet hum of rebuilding. And yet, I was not at peace. Because when you burn one life to build another, you carry the ash with you. I had love now. But I had no family. No status. No protection. And even worse, I had no idea who I was outside of what I had run from. I sat in that studio most days staring at blank paper. The designs wouldn't come. Liam tried to help. He cooked. He cleaned. He kissed me with all the gentleness in the world. But I was distant. Not because I didn't love him. But because I didn't know how to be loved. Without a price. One night, he asked, do you regret it? I looked at him. At the way he always held his breath when he asked me hard questions. And I said, no. I regret who I had to become to survive it. And he held me, without needing to fix it. Just held me, and in that moment, I knew. The fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Not of a perfect life. Not of happily ever after. But of something true. And that was worth everything. It's quiet now. Not the heavy silence of my old life, the one that sat like fog in my lungs, but the kind that breathes with you. The kind that feels like peace. It's been 9 months since I left. 9 months since I walked away from the Fairchild estate, the designer gowns, the cocktail smiles and frozen dinners with a man who never loved me. 9 months since I became real. I live in a tiny apartment now. Brooklyn. 4th floor. The heat rattles sometimes. The view isn't glamorous, it's a fire escape and the brick wall of the building next door, but it's mine. And I wake up alone most mornings. Yes, alone. Liam left 3 months ago. Not with anger. Not with betrayal. Just the weight of loving someone who didn't know how to love herself yet. He told me I needed space. Not to fill the silence with him, but to find myself in it. I cried. Of course I did. He kissed my forehead, handed me my sketchbook, and whispered, "I'll always be somewhere out there. But you have to meet yourself first." And so I did. Slowly. Awkwardly. Painfully. I started designing again. Not for fashion weeks or galleries. For women like me. I sketched late into the night, lines and color and emotion stitched into paper. Women with tired eyes and strong hearts. Outfits that felt like armor and art at once. I opened my own little studio 6 weeks ago. No investors. No headlines. Just a storefront with a cracked window and a hand-painted sign. Clothing for the rewritten woman. And women come. They come with stories, scars on their wrists, silence in their marriages, fire in their bones. Some speak, some don't. But they all ask me the same thing with their eyes. Can I still become something? And I show them they already are. I design with them. We laugh. We cry. We don't talk about legacy or family names or husbands who silenced us. We talk about colors we've never worn. The feel of fabric that doesn't belong to anyone else. Sometimes, I see my mother's face in the mirror when I'm sewing. Sometimes, I wonder if she ever wanted more but never dared to ask. Sometimes, I think about Daniel. About the man who was built for power but never taught how to love. I don't hate him. I don't forgive him either. But I've let him go. That's the difference. And Liam? He sends postcards. I don't know if we'll ever find our way back to each other. But I know this. I love him. And more importantly, I love myself now, too. That's the thing no one tells you when you leave a life built by others. You don't step into a perfect one. You stumble. You ache. You rebuild. And then one day, you wake up. And you're no longer just surviving. You're becoming. Not someone else. But the woman you were always meant to be.